Rick, are you sharing?
Yeah, I see it.
I'm seeing it.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Mike. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A moment of silence for the officers who lost their lives due to the January 6th insurrection.
Finally, the third big lie being told by a former president and his supporters is that the mob who sought to impose their will through violence are the nation's true patriots. Is that what you thought when you looked at the mob ransacking the Capitol, destroying property, literally defecating in the hallways, rifling through the desks of senators and representatives, hunting down members of Congress? Patriots? Not in my view. To me, the true patriots were the more than 150 Americans who peacefully expressed their vote at the ballot box. The election workers who protected the integrity of the vote. And the heroes who defended this Capitol. You can't love your country only when you win. You can't obey the law only when it's convenient. You can't be patriotic when you embrace and enable lies. Those who stormed this Capitol, and those who instigated and incited, and those who called on them to do so, held a dagger at the throat of America, at American democracy. They didn't come here out of patriotism or principle. They came here in rage, not in service of America, but rather in service of one man.
Good morning, Democrats. You'll notice that it's not December 2021, so we will fix that. But anyway, I'm Mike Falk. I'm your host for today. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here. We're glad you keep coming back. We appreciate it.
Good morning, gang. Apparently this Q, or QAnon, whatever that is, has been saying defamatory things. We need to put this in the hand and serve Q.
They're having a convention on a boat, leaving from Panama, Florida to Nassau.
Yes! Yes! We go on, we go on! We're going undercover.
I am Captain Bonsoir-Fils. Before you wonder, yes, I have been acquitted. All good. Everything is good now.
Great.
Fan out reconnaissance. Nice meeting you, Coco.
So nice to meet y'all, too. A beautiful QAnon couple.
You should see him with his pants off.
You know, Q is a question, a query, and a quest.
Here's what I'm thinking. Clemmy could get next to that little weirdo.
I did it to become Miss Teen Whiskey Pete's, and I can do it now.
So you guys know who Q is?
That's a weird question. Let me ask you something. You guys cops?
Go, 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 go.
Welcome to Jeffrey Epstein's Island.
Heroes. Forged. Fire.
Someone has to get this bomb safely out to sea.
Not it.
Obviously, I was going to do it. Why volunteer? Why would I step in and say that dramatically? I'll do it.
Reno 911, the hunt for QAnon.
Exclusively
on Paramount Plus sign.
Is it bad that I feel like I'm being threatened with a good time?
I mean, this is some of the nice stuff. Some of this is actually next year's stuff, by the way.
Well, that was a little comic relief there. If you have Paramount or HBO, you can watch that. Looks like it started on December 23rd. You know, that might have been on the light side, but Q is we're seemingly normal people, believe in all sorts of conspiracy nonsense. If your kids came home from school spouting that nonsense, you'd probably send them to their room. So anyway, I guess they don't get sent to your room if you're an adult. So thanks for bearing with us on that. Electric cars are here to stay. And I know I see a lot of them on the road. They started with hybrids, but Dory Larson is going to be speaking at a third speaker series event at the DEC. It's on Zoom. Sorry, January 19th, 2 to 3. Go to SumterFloridaDemocrats.com for tickets. It's $22. The reason there is a cost for this is that the Democrats versus Republicans, we pay rent. We have to, any kind of campaign or outreach programs we have to pay for, those are free to Republicans in the villages. So that's why there's a donation for that. So anyone interested, please join. This is Florida is number one we are number one in a few things, I think, in COVID and now with the most arrests for the insurrection. So Joe Gruters and the public's headquarters, or the public Eric's did their part to fund and contribute the insurrection. We've all heard it. Here's a Florida man, Adam Johnson, Manatee County. I think that's Tampa, down by Tampa. But I believe that he has been sentenced. Another one, Jonathan Pollock, another Florida man. They haven't caught this guy yet. North Lakeland. This is the sister of that guy. I don't know if they've caught her or not. But I guess it'd be a Florida girl instead of Florida man. Here's another guy, Marion County, Summerfield, covered in Nazi tattoos, member of the Unforgiven, whatever that is, recently released from Florida prison for attempted murder. Nice guy. At the Capitol. This guy, Army veteran, member of Oath Keepers, Titusville. Nice guy. Notice he cut his hair to try to make him so he's unrecognizable. This guy here is a Michael Jackson impersonator out of Orlando. Joined a group of Oath Keepers while walking through the Capitol riots. I wonder what they thought of that. Oath Keepers. This guy here, actually on video, assaulting police with the statement, "Tell Pelosi we're coming for that bitch." Nice guy. We're number one down here for that. The militia news, the anti-government militia, founded in 2009, been tied to the Capitol riots, founders under investigation. Ron DeSantis wants to establish a militia control to support the National Guard. Well, you know what? It might not be classified as anti-government, but I think it could be classified as anti-protest. Probably going to be used to enforce the anti-protest law, his anti-protest law, which will certainly be selectively enforced and selectively prosecuted. The president signed a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's going to boost our economy, fight climate change, repair infrastructure. Any Republicans voted for this are facing threats. Our representatives, 0 out of 16 voted for this. Neither Republican senator. Uh, 10 out of 10 Democrats voted for it, and since there's no Democrats in the Senate representing the state, that was 0 for 0. You can bet, though, down the road, they're going to be asking for, they're going to be touting that, going, you know what, all this money coming to our state, look what I got for you, when they actually gave nothing. You might want to take a picture of this. There's going to be a lot of benefit to Florida from that infrastructure bill. And of course, you won't find one Republican admitting to supporting that, even though they'll admit to providing that to their constituents, which they didn't vote for. I know it's bizarre, but that's the way it is. It's politics for you. Mr. Christ was going to be here today, in fact, but due to COVID, not only did that not happen, there was going to be a meet and greet down south of 44, also at Fenney, That didn't happen because of COVID. We're going to get Mr. Christ rescheduled. And right now, that's why we're meeting on Zoom today. And so we'll do what we can to get to work with Mr. Christ's congressional calendar and get him back in here in person to talk to us. Our featured speaker for today is Al Mytty. Al is involved in World Beyond War and Veterans for Peace, Florida Peace and Justice Alliance. Al's going to talk about the 20 years since September 11th, the endless war on terror, outsized role the military plays in our, in our national priorities, little secrets, gross errors are made along the way, and how military decision makers retire come from companies that benefit military contracts, and priorities are where we put our money. During Vietnam, the President Johnson and a lot of the people in Congress had stock in Bell helicopter. Well, guess who made the Huey and the Cobra helicopters? That was Bell, and they all benefited from that. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to Al, and because he's a lot better versed on this than I am. So welcome, Al. Are you unmuted?
I am unmuted, and I got to tell you, it might be more fun to watch Reno 911 again than what I'm going to present. But nevertheless, I will present, and I'll go to share screen, I hope. Let me go back to the beginning here. Okay, everybody can see the slides, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for letting me present today. I'm going to talk about the global war on terror. And as Mike mentioned, I'm associated with the Central Florida chapters of World Beyond War, Veterans for Peace, and the Florida Peace and Justice Alliance. This was promoted as an interactive event. So what comes up next is a quick quiz about the war on terror. You can write your answers down, you can ignore the questions, you can do whatever you want. But here are some quick questions about the global war on terror. Number one, we remember September 11th as the day when the Taliban from Afghanistan attacked the United States. True or false? Number two, I'm going to go through these quickly. Saddam Hussein from Iraq was supplying Al-Qaeda with weapons to attack the U.S. True or false? Three, Osama bin Laden was from what country? Number four, approximately how many people died from the 9/11 hijacked planes and crashes into the buildings or the ground? Number five, 7,000 plus U.S. military personnel have died from the military operations in the global war on terror. How many have died from suicide? Now I'll go to the last five questions. Whom had the Taliban offered to turn over to a third country in October 2001? A, B, or C. Number seven, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is a Pakistani Islamist militant held by the United States in Guantanamo Bay under terrorism-related charges. He was named as the principal architect in the 9/11 attacks. How long has he been in U.S. custody without trial? Number eight, the Taliban offered to negotiate a surrender, which was refused by the U.S. in what year? Number nine, Saddam Hussein from Iraq offered to leave his country if the U.S. would do what? And number 10, the U.S. helped to financially and militarily support the Mujahideen, one faction which became the Taliban way back in the 1970s, and the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein militarily in Iraq. True or false? I'll go back through these after the presentation, at the end of the presentation. On September 11th, we were horrified when 19 militants attacked. I got to change something here on my slide here. Sorry. When 19 suicidal militants hijacked jetliners that could attack this country and cause the deaths of 2,977 people. Why, we asked, why do they hate us? How will we respond? Well, our response came less than a month later on October 7th, 2001. Who did that? October 7th, 2001 was when, this is how our global war on terror began. These are the words of Lieutenant General Chuck Wald, who was the commanding general of the Air Operations Center in Saudi Arabia. It was his job to coordinate all of the the Afghan air war. Apparently, however, the CIA had not gotten the message and launched the first ever combat strike by a drone. And I'm trying to change something here on my, sorry, let me go back here. That CIA Predator drone killed others, but the Taliban commander Mullah Muhammad Omar escaped that day. He died of tuberculosis on April 2013. Here's how the war in Afghanistan ended. Our investigation now concludes that the strike was a tragic mistake. Those are the words of another general, General Kenneth Clark Frank McKenzie, commander of the U.S. Central Command, describing another drone attack that occurred on August 29th, 2001. Our 20-year war in Afghanistan ended with a strike, with an attack on Zamari Ahmadi that killed him along with 9 other civilians, and 7 of those were children. Zamari Ahmadi had been employed by a California-based humanitarian organization and had applied for a visa to come to the U.S. These are pictures of the Zamari Ahmadi family, some of them, and some of the victims of the U.S., or some of the last victims of the U.S. war in Afghanistan. This was the promise. America's extraordinary technology would enable the military to kill the right people while taking the greatest precautions to not harm the wrong ones. The New York Times did an extensive 5-year review of the aerial war in Afghanistan. According to the Pentagon, misidentification was involved in 4% of the cases they reviewed. But at the casualty sites that the New York Times looked at, misidentification was a major factor in 17% of those incidents and accounted for nearly a third of civilian deaths and injuries. And these errors did not just involve quicksilver intelligence of an immediate and an imminent threat. In the New York Times sample, misidentification occurred just as frequently in strikes planned in advance. As an example, a January 2017 strike on an ISIS, quote, foreign fighter headquarters in East Mosul that turned out to be the home that killed people in what turned out to be 3 civilian homes. The ISIS headquarters down the street were untouched. Documents exposed by whistleblower Daniel Hale prove that the government is aware that 90% of its drone strike victims are not the intended targets. The war in Afghanistan has been a strategic failure. These are the words of another general, General Mark Milley. So if it was a failure, then who won the war in Afghanistan? According to the Wall Street Journal, Portal Center, and other sources, private contractors won the war. The U.S. military spent $14 trillion during the 2 decades of that war that benefited organizations from large manufacturers to entrepreneurs. Since the September 11th attacks, military outsourcing at the Pentagon increased Pentagon spending to $14 trillion, creating opportunities and for those contractors as the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq stretched on. 1/3 to 1/2 of that amount went to contractors, and the largest of those are the 5 largest are Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics Corporation, Raytheon Technologies, and Northrop Grumman. They took the lion's share at $2.1 trillion. And this is a picture of a pie chart of our discretionary spending. You'll see that half of the discretionary spending is spent on the military. And 1/4 to 1/3 of all Pentagon contracts go to those 5 contractors that I mentioned earlier: Lockheed, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. The weapons manufacturers have spent $2.5 billion on lobbying over the last 2 decades and employ an average of over 700 lobbyists over the last 5 years, more than one for every member of Congress. 4 of the past 5 secretaries of defense have come from those 5 arms contractors. Over half the Pentagon spending since 2001 went to the private sector. And again, the Pentagon has failed an audit. It hopes to complete an audit by 2027. But Congress nevertheless recently approved a $778 billion gift to the military contractors. These are the generals during the war on terror. The generals told us, we're turning the corner. We're training hundreds of thousands of Afghans to carry on the war. We need more troops. We need fewer troops. Regardless, we need more money. And when they left the military, they went to high-paying corporate board positions or executive positions with the military contractors or lobbyists. The 8 generals who commanded forces in Afghanistan between 2008 and 2018 have gone on to serve on more than 20 corporate boards. I won't mention all of them, but if we go to the current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin is a retired 4-star general after retiring as CENTCOM commander. After retiring, he joined the board of Raytheon Technologies, a military contractor, and his stock holdings as of October were roughly $500,000, and his compensation, including stock, totaled $1.4 million. Before Austin, we had Secretary James Mattis, who was also a 4-star general. After retiring from the military, Mattis went to work for FWA Consultants and served on the board of General Dynamics. Between 2013 and 2019, he received more than $900,000 in compensation, including company stock. Wasn't Vietnam enough of a lesson when the generals misled us or perhaps they even intentionally lied to us. It is common knowledge here in the US that 58,000 Americans died in that war. Less known is that upwards of 3.6 million people died along with those Americans.
It is with such activity in mind that the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside. That will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed, so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of South America and say this is not just. The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
I want to, next week we'll celebrate Martin Luther King Day, a day of service, and I want to a lot of us need to thank Jill Moss Greenberg, who I think is on this Zoom call. She was instrumental in working with Coretta Scott King in making that become a national holiday of service. So thank you, Jill, for all that work that you've done. This is a political cartoon from the 1950s, 60 years ago, 60 plus years ago, when President Eisenhower began to warn us about the military-industrial complex. And as you can see there, healthcare doesn't get served, education doesn't get served, arts and sciences don't get served, but the military gets served with gluttony. You've seen this quote before, but it's, I think, worth repeating. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. Words from President Eisenhower. The National Priorities Project has done a lot of research on this and determined that in the 20 years since 9/11, the U.S. response of thoroughly militarizing foreign and domestic policy has cost us over $21 trillion. And their research further shows that in exchange for that, for less than half of that $21 trillion that we spent since 9/11, we could have fully decarbonized the electric grid in the United States for $4.5 trillion. We could have created 5 million jobs paying $15 an hour with benefits and cost of living adjustments for 10 years. That would have cost $2.3 trillion. We could have erased all student debt for $1.7 trillion, and that's just less than half of what we spent. We know that 3% of U.S. military spending could end starvation on Earth. And when we come to National Priorities Project, if you go to their website and you click on, they have some, to my way of thinking, some really cool stuff. It's called trade-offs. You can go to the data and tools section of that and play around with some filtering options and so on. For example, for military in 2021, taxpayers in just the state of Florida are paying $45.4 billion to support U.S. military. Here's what that money would have done for us. We could have created over 1 million jobs that pay $15 an hour. We could have hired 680,000 elementary teachers. We could have provided medical care for 4.7 million veterans. We could have provided 2.6 million scholarships for university students for 4 years. But instead, we spent that money, squandered that money on a war.This chart shows where U.S. military bases and installations are located. We have over 800 military bases and installations scattered all across the world that cost us more than $65 billion. And then we wonder why China, Russia, Iran, and elsewhere around the world are fearful of the United States, and they look at us as the threat to peace and the threat to security. So what has the war on terror accomplished? This is information from David Swanson of World Beyond War. The wars that were used as part of the war on terror and usually use the 2001 authorization for the use of military force included wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, the Philippines, and related military actions in all those countries listed and even more. I've seen numbers that show that we've had military operations in 135 countries of the world. The war on terror and the 2001 AUMF also helped to sponsor coups in Afghanistan, Venezuela, Iraq, Haiti, Somalia, Honduras, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela again, Bolivia, Venezuela again. We look at the dead from the war on terror, and this includes this is the people who were killed directly and violently by the wars. So it doesn't count those who froze to death or starved to death, died of disease, and so on. Iraq, 2.4 million deaths. Afghanistan and Pakistan, 1.2 million deaths. Libya, 250,000 deaths. Syria, 1.5 million deaths. And unless humanitarian aid is immediately provided and the world agrees to release the Afghanistan frozen assets, there's the possibility that another 1 million people in Afghanistan will starve to death this winter. Now, to these figures can be added another 0.007 million deaths from U.S. troops, a figure that does not include mercenaries or suicides. So we've had a total of 6 million deaths from the global war on terror, and the U.S. troops make up 0.1% of that. Now, regarding that 7,000 deaths, which are tragic, we also know, though, that there have been almost 30,000 suicides from folks who served in the military during the global war on terror. We say that war is natural and it's in our genes. If it was natural, would we have so many military suicides? Would we have so much post-traumatic stress disorder? We hear of PTSD as a result of war, but we don't hear of PTSD as a result of peace. This is what the results of the war look like, the destruction to our earth and the world. A couple of myths of war are that war is inevitable and war is the last result. Well, if that's true. Who said this, by the way? Here's another quiz. Naturally, the common people don't want war. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Well, who said that? Hermann Goering, one of the principal architects of the Nazi police state, who established the Gestapo and concentration camps for the corrective treatment of difficult opponents. We think also that war is necessary. War is the only option. So for the war on terror for 20 plus years was our only option. We had to bomb and fight. We had to cause death and destruction. We could save the world by also helping to destroy it. We could defeat terrorism. We could nation build. We had no choice but to do this for decades. And yet, as reported back in 2001 and by the Washington Post and then by others, President Bush rejected an offer from the Taliban to turn over Osama bin Laden to a neutral party or neutral country. We rejected that offer not only once, but apparently twice, and chose to continue a war instead. And we know also that the Taliban peace deal might have been accomplished many years and thousands of lives ago. There were 3 critical moments when the Taliban, out of weakness, were ready to cut a deal, but the United States, out of hubris, didn't want to hear about it. As Rumsfeld was quoted, "The answer is no," he said at the Pentagon. "It would not be consistent with what I have said." He didn't want to negotiate a peace treaty with the Taliban then. And as the New York Times reported in August of last year, Did the war in Afghanistan have to happen? It was a choice. And going back to that, regarding the war in Iraq, Bush thought that Saddam was prepared to leave. Saddam Hussein was prepared to take $1 billion and to go into exile before the Iraq war. But we chose war. We spent somewhere around $88 billion to pursue war with Iraq. We'll go back to the quiz here. So we remember September 11th is the day when the Taliban from Afghanistan attacked the U.S. That's false. Saddam Hussein from Iraq was supplying al-Qaeda with weapons to attack the U.S. That's false. Osama bin Laden was from what country? Saudi Arabia. Approximately how many people died? Approximately 3,000. 7,000 U.S. military personnel died from military operations. How many died from suicide? 30,000 plus. Whom had the Taliban offered to turn over to a third country in October 2001? Osama bin Laden. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has been held for 18 years, since March of 2003, without a trial. The Taliban offered to negotiate a surrender, which was refused by the U.S. in 2002. Saddam Hussein offered to leave the country if the U.S. would do what? Let him go into exile and take $1 billion. The U.S. helped to financially and militarily support the Mujahideen, and the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein militarily in Iraq. That is true. A lot of folks remember Senator J. William Fulbright. Well, Senator Fulbright from Arkansas said regarding the war in Vietnam, the Cold Warriors, instead of having to say how they knew that Vietnam was part of a plan for the communization of the world, so manipulated the terms of the public discussion as to be able to demand that the skeptics prove that it was not. If the skeptics could not, then the war must go on. To end it would be recklessly and risking the national security. We come to the ultimate illogic. War is the course of prudence and sobriety until the case for peace is proved under impossible rules of evidence, or until the enemy surrenders. Rational men cannot deal with each other on this basis. And this is a picture of Malika Ahmadi, the age 2, who died in the U.S. drone strike. And as Dr. King told us, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence, and toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. What are our priorities in the United States, and can we change? And with that, I'll close and thank you, and I guess we'll open it up to some questions or comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Al. We appreciate it. Everyone, down, if you want to raise your hand, down in the lower, on your PCs, hover over your reactions, click on that, and raise your hand will be down the bottom of that will be a raise hand. So if you have comments or questions for Al, please do that. We want to hear from you. I could start, Al. When you mentioned that the U.S., you mentioned the U.S. military spent $14 trillion over the war on terror. that's really, I know that, the military spent that money, but that money came from us, U.S. taxpayers. And as I look at that, I saw your graph of 50% of our discretionary spending is military. And I mean, it's like, we need a strong national defense, but my God, that looks like just a big jobs program to me.
Yes, and that's how it's touted, as a jobs program. But in fact, we know that research proves that spending the money on military creates far fewer jobs than if we spent that same money on education or healthcare or clean energy, infrastructure, or simply given the money back to taxpayers. Further, that pie chart that I showed with discretionary funds doesn't include the money that goes to the Department of Energy. That's where the money that's going for nuclear weapons is spent, or that's where that's budgeted. So when we're spending $1.5 trillion to upgrade nuclear weapons, that's coming out of the Department of Energy. It also doesn't include the money that we have to spend for veterans benefits, because we create all these wars and all the health care that the veterans are going to need for the rest of their lives. So thank you for the point. It's our tax dollars.
That's right. Thank you. Who do we have? We've got Ann.
Yeah. Hi. Can we get a copy of your excellent presentation? Because I understand you wanted to fit in a time limit, but it was quite fast. I would like to be able to look at it later.
Sure. And by the way, Ann, there's no charge for it.
Well, you aren't going to get rich that way, Al.
Well, time is over for that.
Okay, looks like Kate. Let's unmute Kate. Kate, you're going to see an unmute. We're going to request that you unmute. You have to hit that. Oh, she's gone. Okay.
Shirley, you asked a question in the chat. Do you want to ask that out loud?
Is Kate there? Kate, are you still there? Or Marcia? Okay, we can't find Kate. So Marcia, let's unmute Marcia.
There we go.
Thanks, Marcia.
Oh, I would love a copy of that as well. There's so many statistics in there that are just stunning when you hear them. And it seems as though we can never get out of this continuing cycle of war. And in terms of your making money on all this, I guess what you have to do, Al, is join the military or be on the board. And I think one of the things that I found striking in all of this is when you said who the winners really were, and that is the military-industrial complex, the organizations and companies like Raytheon that not just make their money on equipment and research and development on how to kill better and faster, but the military members who have served on the boards of these companies. That should not be even a possibility. There's the old saying is you where you put your money signifies what your priorities are. And in this country, it's clear that they're not on human beings. What do we do, to make the kind of dramatic change that's necessary?
And what's appalling also, we showed that in that slide from President Eisenhower 60 plus years ago. Dr. King saying we're approaching moral, immorality with the way we spend our money. That's been, 50 plus years, and we don't change because the military industrial complex controls Congress, and we allow it to continue to happen. And by the way, that's on both sides of the political aisle. Democrats support it just as much, with a few exceptions, with some courageous Democrats who voted against, one courageous, Barbara Lee, who voted against the 2001 authorization on the use of military force.
The only one.
And some, and some, some others who consistently come across and challenge now the spending on the waste on militarism. Yeah. And they take it, we now have 90, I think it was 90 who co-signed a bill that would do the radical thing of reducing military expenses, reducing the Pentagon budget by just 10%. We got 90 of them, I think, something like that. They're slowly coming out of the woodwork, and we as taxpayers need to encourage and support them, so that they know that they will be supported if they speak out against military spending.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you all for your patience. What an excellent presentation. What bothers me a lot, well, that last quote was quite impactful. Hate multiplies hate, and only love will diffuse that hate. But in today's world, I'm so afraid that hate is going to destroy love. It's going to work the wrong way. That wasn't, what do you think?
What's the phrase? I'm going to misquote it. Somebody here could quote it better. The arc of justice is long, and it bends towards justice or whatever. And eventually, love will conquer hate. Eventually, but we have to help it along, and we have to do everything we can to stop the hate, and do everything we can to encourage cooperation and nonviolence and nonviolent ways of solving conflicts and resolving differences. And it can be done.
Oh, I hope so.
Thank you, Al. Thanks, Kate. Ash, you've been up there with your hand raised for a while. How about, are you unmuted?
Okay, I have been wondering, when Senior Bush attacked Iraq, it was a United Nations force that went into Iraq. And 2003, when Junior Bush went into Iraq, suddenly it became an American war. I never understood what happened, why it couldn't be a United Nations war in 2003.
There's a lot of information that said that even as early as 9/11, Rumsfeld and others were saying, let's take it big, go as big as you want to go on this thing. And they were encouraging war, not only in Afghanistan, but already at that time thinking we're going to war in Iraq. So there was very little interest in, we were going to go that alone if we didn't have the support of a few other countries that joined in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. There's also a lot of evidence that we think the Gulf War was justified and all of that. There's evidence that Kuwait felt threatened, but also that Saddam Hussein felt like there were some things that Kuwait was doing with the support of others that threatened him in Iraq. So I assume historians are going to sort through that.
I also heard in that, Al, that, and I don't know if it was just, urban myths or whatever, urban legend, but that, that Junior wanted a war, and he was willing to do what he could to do that, because he felt that was to be known in as a war president or something. I don't know. I mean, there was probably no proof of that, but certainly you hear that because of people talking. And so that could be it too, it's, who knows? Okay, Shirley.
Good morning. Thanks, Al. That was a great presentation. So my question is, military is such a big part of our whole country, the whole paradigm of our whole country. And how would that even change? I mean, it seems to me it would take not just this president, who may or may not be in for only 4 years, but it's as soon as it jumps over to another party, the thought about changing the military is gone. So and not just at war, but we have troops all over the world.
Right.
How would that even change? I mean, obviously, well, I think probably not in my lifetime or even in my children's lifetime. So what do you propose? What do you propose to change the whole paradigm of this country?
Well,
it's not nothing big there, just, try it.
There's a book published by, it's a booklet, it's about 140 pages, a global security system published by World Beyond War and written by a whole bunch of leading scholars and experts in this area. And they propose a three-pronged strategy of demilitarizing security and creating a culture of peace. It takes a whole, paradigm shift. It takes a radical change in values, as Dr. King called for. It takes people to rise up and say enough is enough. When we look at our spending on war, we're spending, what the U.S. spends is more than the next 11 countries combined. And when we look at that graph, by the way, 5 or 6 of those countries, of the top 11 spenders on militarism in the world, are our allies. And every time we hear something about, China's doing this, they're building an aircraft carrier. Well, geez, we got to build a whole lot more aircraft carriers. China's going to hypersonic missiles and Russia's doing this. Can't we have some leadership that says, let's talk about a race to disarm instead of a continued arms race? And will we have the courage? And I don't know if the politicians can do it. Can we have the people rise up and say, we can do this? But there are answers to this, but I don't have them all.
All right. Thank you, Al. Let's take a couple more. We've got Helen and Dennis lined up, so let's take those two, and then we'll anyone else that hasn't had their question, hasn't been able to put a question in, please send an email. You can send it to me or send it to Al, send it to the board. And Al, you can, if you'd be so kind as if someone has a question like that in email, would you be, we'll take some time and to answer that in email?
Sure.
Very good. Thank you. Helen, how about you?
Good morning. Thank you, Al, for an excellent presentation. It's very informative and touches my heart in many ways. I will be in touch about a possible presentation to another organization, but my questions are twofold. One, do you see, looking further back before Eisenhower, was there an alternative to war during World War II?
I'm sorry for the smile. What a horrendous war that was. 80 million to 100 million people died in that war. And we call it the Great War. Well, it was the greatest source of death. And the fellow, I mentioned some of his materials, David Swanson from World Beyond War, wrote a book, just came out last year, called Leaving World War II Behind. And in that, he goes through the history of what preceded World War II, and a lot of the myths. He shatters a lot of the myths about World War II. I'm also going to promote something that we're going to be having. Our chapter of World Beyond War will be sponsoring. We haven't set the date yet, but in February, we're going to have a debate. A lot of folks on this call, I don't think Mark Welton's on this Zoom call, but Dr. Mark Welton will be debating David Swanson from World Beyond War on issues about is war ever justified? And that will no doubt get into, was World War II justified and necessary? So stay tuned for that, please.
Thank you,
You'll
Al.
hear about it, I hope.
Dennis, how about you?
Hi, this is a question for Al from Jill Moss Greenberg in the chat window. Al, could you speak about the human losses beyond deaths, but the number of veterans who are homeless and the high rate of suicide, PTSD, and other mental health issues?
Probably, perhaps not as well as Jill could, but we know certainly that 30,000, 7,000 died from military operations, 30,000 plus have died so far from suicide, and that around 20 military veterans commit suicide each day. We know also that somewhere around, I think it's 40% of the homeless in the United States are U.S. military veterans. An interesting statistic to me, 37% of the mass shooters in the United States are U.S. military veterans. That doesn't mean that veterans are going to go out and do mass shooters. But when I hear that statistic, though, when I heard it the first time, somebody said, imagine if 37% of the mass shooters in the United States were Muslim. Imagine if they were Latino. Imagine if they were gay. We'd be looking at that and wondering, what in the heck are we doing? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and Jill may be able, as I said, is perhaps a better expert on it than I am.
Okay, thank you, Al. There's just one other thing I had in my notes, Al, that you said that you talked about an audit by 2027. Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it.
They've consistently failed audits. It's apparently the only governmental agency that's never had a successful audit, and now they did it again last year, and then I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. We taxpayers spent $400 million trying to do an audit of the Department of Defense. Now they're saying, well, maybe in 5 years. Yeah, I agree. Believe it when we see it again.
I hear you. Okay. I think we're kind of coming down to kind of the end of the day, not the end of the day, but certainly the end of the presentation. So if anybody that has questions for Al that we haven't addressed, and I know I don't have everybody on screen, but we're doing a pretty good job, I think, of trying to keep track of everyone. But please send a note either to me at my email on the board website, or any of us on the board, or just contact us and we'll get it to Al and have him answer your question, or direct you to, I know Al's a wealth of knowledge for references and stuff, and he could certainly direct you to areas that will answer your question. Is that right, Al? Can I presume that?
I don't presume to be an expert on anything, but yes,
well, I know, but
I
think you've got a lot of information at your fingertips, more than we do.
Sure, be happy to.
Very good, I appreciate it. Okay, let's go to the rest of the slideshow. Okay, today's a wrap. Thanks to Amy Jenkins and everybody else, Amy for putting the program together today, and Rick and Andy for working through our technical issues. We had a few glitches, but as typical typical troubleshooters, we work through them. Sue Dubman for providing content for today's presentation. And Al, thanks a million for you. We appreciate it for taking your time, coming in at the last minute, because we had to, we knew you'd be a better draw than Mr. Christ. So that's why we stuck you in here. And thanks to the entire board for your effort on the event today. And we will see you all next month. Keep coming back, join up, talk to you soon. Have a great day, have a great weekend.